There's something about October that changes the way shadows fall, the way darkness pools in places it shouldn't, the way certain figures appear at the edges of things, watching, waiting, always just out of reach of the light. And if you've ever felt that prickling sensation on the back of your neck during that particular month, if you've ever caught movement in your peripheral vision that vanished when you turned to look, then maybe you've already encountered them. Maybe you're one of the ones they've marked. I'm going to tell you about the Watchers. Not a single entity, but a phenomenon that repeats across different places, different times, always during October, always following the same patterns. These aren't isolated incidents. They're connected in ways that most people never realize until it's too late, until they've seen the signs for themselves. And once you know what to look for, you start seeing it everywhere. Let me start with the children in the alleyway, because that's where the pattern becomes most clear. Picture this, an apartment complex in a sketchy part of town, the kind of place you can't find unless you know exactly where you're going. The kind of place that feels empty even when it's crowded, where the sodium lights cast everything in that sick orange glow that makes shadows look deeper than they should be. It's October, naturally, and a group of kids decides to play hide and seek in the dark. Innocent enough, right? Kids playing games near Halloween, but that's when they appear. Two clowns. Not Halloween decorations. Not party performers who got lost. Two impossibly tall figures in clown costumes with faces painted completely black except for their eyes. One with an afro wig in garish colors, another with long green hair and legs that seemed to stretch on forever. And here's the critical detail that everyone misses. They didn't jump out to scare. They didn't chase immediately. They stood still first, watching, waiting. One at the end of the alleyway, perfectly positioned under a streetlight so the kids would see it. The other positioned to cut off escape routes. Strategic. Calculated. These children scattered, ran to their apartments, told their parents. But here's where it gets worse. One of the kids, Ellie, he'd already encountered a clown before his siblings did. In the courtyard, hiding behind bushes during the game, he thought he heard his friend approaching, but when he looked up, a clown was staring directly down at him. Not his friend, the clown. And think about that timing. The clowns weren't reacting to where the kids went. They were already in position, already waiting in multiple locations around that apartment complex. Like they'd planned it. Like they knew the kids would be playing outside that night. And then comes the truly terrifying part. Hours later, middle of the night, second-story window. One of those kids wakes up thirsty, goes to get water, hears a noise at the window. The window on the second floor, and when she opens the blinds, she's face to face with the same clown from the alleyway, at the second-story window. How did it get up there? Did it climb? Was it on a ladder? Or was it something else entirely, something that doesn't follow the normal rules about where figures in clown costumes should be able to reach? Now, you might be thinking this is just a creepy isolated incident. Weird people in a sketchy neighborhood trying to scare kids on Halloween. But hold that thought, because we need to talk about the house across from the school. Different city, different victim, same October timing. An 11-year-old kid walking home from school, passing by a house that looks abandoned, decrepit, the kind of place that makes your skin crawl just looking at it. And every day during that second week of October, someone's watching from the window. Not waving, not moving, just standing there, a tall silhouette, watching this kid walk past. Day after day after day, the same watching figure. And here's what's important, the kid's friends brush it off. They say it's just someone trying to scare them for Halloween. But it keeps happening. Every single day. The figure never breaks routine, never changes position, just watches. Until one day, it's not in the window anymore. It's on the porch. And the moment that kid walks past, it charges. Now this is where the pattern shifts from watching to hunting. The figure comes flying down the porch steps, chasing, yelling things that make no sense, words that don't form coherent sentences. And that kid has to run, has to hide behind a dumpster in an alleyway, holding their breath while this person walks closer and closer, mumbling to themselves, breathing so loud the kid can hear every inhale and exhale. And eventually it leaves, and the police investigate, and you know what they find? Nobody lives in that house. It's been vacant for years. So who was watching from the window every single day? Who was waiting on that porch? And most importantly, why did they wait exactly that long before making their move? The police theory is a homeless person or a squatter, someone trying to scare the kid for no reason. But that doesn't explain the patient, methodical watching period. That doesn't explain why they waited until exactly 1 week before Halloween. And it doesn't explain why this pattern keeps repeating. Let's jump across the ocean now to rural Poland. Different culture, different approach to Halloween, but same October time frame. A woman walking her dog at night down a quiet road between a forest and a horse stud, approaching an old abandoned stable that belonged to a parish priest. And her dog, Susie, starts going absolutely insane. Not normal barking. Frenzied, terrified barking, focused entirely on the stable and the tree line behind it. And when the woman looks, she sees him, 10 to 20 meters away, right behind that abandoned stable, a man kneeling in white robes. Not hiding, but not exactly in plain sight either. Perfectly positioned in that liminal space between the dim streetlights and complete darkness. And he's not moving, just kneeling there with his back straight, wearing white robes that catch the moonlight, staring in her direction. Now here's the crucial detail everyone misses when they hear this story, the position. He's kneeling, which means he's lower to the ground, harder to see, but his back is perfectly straight. That's not a casual posture. That's not someone who just happened to stop there. That's a ritual position. That's someone performing a specific act, completing a specific purpose. The woman leaves quickly, sees people by the church, doesn't tell them because what would she say? There's someone kneeling by the bushes? She gets home safely. But that night, 5 to 6 hours after she saw that kneeling figure, the stable burns. Someone set it on fire. And people assume it's teenagers pulling pranks, but she knows what she saw. That figure wasn't a giggling teenager. That was someone disturbingly calm, someone waiting for something. And the question that haunts her, was he kneeling there the entire time between when she saw him and when the fire started? 5 or 6 hours in that position, in the cold October night, waiting to complete whatever ritual or purpose required that building to burn. Notice the pattern emerging? Figures that watch, figures that wait, figures positioned strategically in liminal spaces, those in-between areas where light doesn't quite reach. Alleyways, abandoned houses, the edge of forests and old buildings. And they're always still first, always watching before any action occurs. And when action does happen, it's calculated, purposeful, like each incident is following a script that we can't see. But let's add one more piece to this puzzle. A pumpkin patch, late October afternoon, right after school. Friends picking pumpkins, normal autumn activity, except one of them gets dared to grab the biggest pumpkin at the back of the patch, near the wooded area. And that's where he sees it. Behind the pumpkins, near the trees, a figure. Looks like a scarecrow at first, standing perfectly still with a hat on and arms out like a cross. But it's too thin, and the hat moves slightly, like someone breathing underneath it. His friend dismisses it as a decoration, but it's not, because when they start walking back, the figure moves closer. Not walking normally, gliding, floating over the leaves without seeming to move its legs at all. And when they run, they hear leaves crunching behind them faster than normal footsteps should be. The figure stops at the edge of the main area, right where the crowds are, and just watches them leave. Doesn't follow into the populated space. Stays in that liminal zone between the isolated woods and the busy patch. And days later someone reports seeing a strange person in a costume at the same pumpkin patch, late afternoon near the trees, someone who didn't speak or move like a normal person. So it wasn't a one-time sighting. It was there again, waiting again, watching again. Now let's step back and really look at what we have here. 4 incidents, different locations, different victims, but the same October time frame. The same watching behavior. The same strategic positioning in liminal spaces. The same impossible elements that don't quite make sense. Clowns at second-story windows. Figures that glide instead of walk. People kneeling for hours in the cold. Watching from abandoned houses where nobody lives. These aren't random scary encounters. This is a pattern. And the pattern suggests something far more disturbing than simple pranks or dangerous people. Because each of these incidents involves a fundamental wrongness, things that don't follow normal rules, heights that shouldn't be reachable, buildings that shouldn't have occupants, movements that shouldn't be possible, and always that patient watching period before anything happens. Think about what watching really means in this context. It's not casual observation. It's study. It's the way a predator observes prey, learning patterns, learning routines, learning exactly when and where to strike. The clowns knew where those kids would be playing. The house figure knew exactly when that child walked home from school. The robed figure knew that woman walked her dog down that road every night. The pumpkin patch figure knew where people would wander away from the crowds. They weren't waiting randomly. They were waiting specifically. And here's what makes my skin crawl. What about the ones we don't hear about? What about the incidents where people saw the watchers but nothing happened afterward? How many people walked past an alleyway in October and saw a tall figure standing in the shadows, perfectly still, and kept walking? How many people glimpsed someone watching from an abandoned building window and assumed it was a trick of the light? How many dog walkers saw figures kneeling by the side of dark roads and didn't report it because, well, what exactly would they report? Someone kneeling? The watchers depend on that. They depend on the fact that standing still and watching isn't technically a crime. They depend on liminal spaces where the rules are unclear, where you can't quite be sure what you saw, where explaining it to someone else makes you sound paranoid or foolish. They operate in that perfect zone where they are visible enough to complete whatever purpose they have, but plausible enough that most people dismiss what they've seen. And we have to talk about the consistency of October. Not September, not November, October specifically. Now, the easy explanation is Halloween, costume season, when strange figures are expected and therefore dismissed more easily. But I think it's deeper than that. October is liminal time. The year dying, seasons changing, the veil between summer and winter growing thin. Ancient cultures recognized October as a time when boundaries weakened, when things from one realm could slip into another. And while we've modernized that idea into Halloween parties and candy corn, maybe there's truth underneath the commercialization. Maybe October really is when certain barriers become permeable, when certain watchers can cross into spaces they normally couldn't reach. Because let's address the elephant in the room, these figures aren't entirely human. Oh, they wear human shapes, human costumes, human clothing, but the details are wrong. The proportions are off. They move wrong. They reach places they shouldn't be able to reach. They maintain positions longer than human endurance would allow. They appear in buildings that are provably empty. And most tellingly, they seem to operate with a collective purpose, following the same patterns across vast distances, as if they are all working from the same playbook. What if the watchers aren't individuals at all? What if they are manifestations of something else, something that takes on different forms depending on the fear profile of their target? Children playing in the dark see clowns because clowns are a universal childhood fear amplified in October. A nervous kid walking past a creepy house sees an ambiguous stalker figure because that matches their specific anxiety. A woman in a deeply Christian rural area sees robed figures performing rituals because that taps into her cultural fear framework. A teenager at a pumpkin patch sees something resembling a scarecrow because that's a harvest season symbol twisted wrong. Each watcher tailored to maximize the fear response of its specific target. Each one positioned exactly where it needs to be to create the most effective encounter. And all of them following the same core behavior: watch, wait, reveal yourself gradually, escalate if necessary, but always maintain that aura of wrongness that prevents complete dismissal while avoiding actual confrontation that would break the pattern. Now you might be wondering, what's the purpose? Why watch if not to actually do something? And that's where we get into truly uncomfortable territory. Because maybe the watching is the purpose. Maybe the fear generation is the goal. Maybe these encounters are designed specifically to create a certain kind of experience in the victim, an experience that changes them permanently. Every person who encountered a watcher reports the same long-term effects. They can't forget. They're hypervigilant during October. They see patterns everywhere. They're constantly looking over their shoulders. They've been marked. They've been changed. And maybe that's exactly what the watchers want. Think about it like a tag system. Once you've been watched, once you've had an encounter, you're now part of the network. You're aware. You're looking. And maybe, on some level you don't consciously recognize, you're drawing others into the pattern. You tell your story. Others hear it. Some dismiss it, but others listen closely, too closely, and then they start noticing figures in their own periphery. They start seeing the watchers in their own October nights. The pattern spreads mimetically, but it's more than just a scary story. It's a genuine phenomenon that seems to respond to awareness of itself. The woman in Poland never went down that road again at night. The kid who was chased from the abandoned house still gets scared passing creepy buildings 10 years later. The child who saw the clown at her second-story window never liked playing hide and seek in the dark again. The teenager from the pumpkin patch remembers that gliding figure every single October. They've been permanently altered by their encounters. And in being altered, they've become more sensitive to the phenomenon, more likely to see it again, more likely to recognize it in new forms. This is why the watchers are patient. They don't need to attack. They don't need to make contact. The watching itself, the encounter itself, is the complete transaction. They appear. They watch. They reveal themselves. They create that moment of pure wrong recognition in their target. And then they retreat, their purpose accomplished, leaving behind someone who will never quite feel safe in October darkness again. Someone who will always check the alleyways. Always look twice at abandoned buildings. Always feel that prickling sensation when the shadows fall wrong. And here's the truly disturbing thought I keep coming back to. If the purpose is to create awareness, to mark people, to spread the sensitivity to this phenomenon, then it's working perfectly. Because you're listening to this right now, you're thinking about these patterns. And when October comes around again, you're going to remember this. You're going to be more alert to figures standing still in odd places. You're going to notice when someone's watching a little too long from an unexpected location. You're going to feel that recognition when you see something positioned in the liminal spaces between light and dark. Does that mean you're marked now too? Does hearing about the watchers in enough detail make you susceptible to encountering them yourself? I don't know. But I do know that every October since I started researching these patterns, I've become more aware of the figures at the edges of things. The people who stand too still for too long in places where they shouldn't quite be. The watchers who observe with purposes we can't quite understand but can definitely feel. Let me tell you what I think is really happening, my theory based on piecing together hundreds of these encounters from around the world. I think the watchers are scouts. I think October is when they emerge to identify and mark individuals who meet certain criteria we don't understand. They're not trying to hurt people directly. They're cataloging them, creating a database of sorts, marking people who can perceive them, who react appropriately to their presence, who carry the right kind of sensitivity to wrongness and fear. And I think they've been doing this for a very long time, long before we had words like clowns or scarecrows or robes. They've always adapted to the cultural fear frameworks of their time and place. Medieval villagers saw them as demons. Victorian urbanites saw them as phantoms. Modern people see them as costumed stalkers or cryptids. But it's always the same core behavior: watch, position strategically, reveal gradually, withdraw before confrontation. Mark the sensitive ones. Return to wherever they come from when November arrives and the veil thickens again. What are they marking people for? That's the question that keeps me up at night, because I don't think we've seen the endgame yet. I think we're still in the cataloging phase. They're still watching, still marking, still building their database of sensitive individuals across the world. But eventually, that data will be used for something. And given the methodical, patient, calculated nature of these encounters, I don't think we're going to like what that something turns out to be. Consider the escalation patterns within individual encounters. It always starts with passive watching from a distance. Then the figure moves closer or reveals more detail. Then, if the target hasn't fled, it escalates to pursuit or direct confrontation. But notice, they almost never catch anyone. The kids at the apartment complex all made it inside safely. The child chased from the house escaped. The woman in Poland got home without being followed. The teenager at the pumpkin patch made it to the car. It's like the watchers are testing reaction times, measuring fear responses, observing how their targets handle extreme stress. They're collecting behavioral data, not actually trying to complete an attack. This explains the weird vocalizations too. When the house figure chased that kid, it was yelling things that made absolutely no sense. Not threats, not coherent demands, just meaningless words yelled in a human voice. Was it even human language? Or was it something mimicking the sounds of human speech without understanding the content? The clowns at the apartment complex never spoke at all. They just watched silently. The robed figure in Poland was completely silent. The pumpkin patch figure never made a sound. They communicate through presence and movement, not language, because maybe language isn't their natural mode of expression. Maybe they are operating on a frequency that doesn't require words. And we need to talk about the physical impossibilities again, because they are crucial to understanding what we're actually dealing with. The clown at the second-story window in the middle of the night. Let's really think about this. There was no fire escape, no ladder, no obvious climbing route, and it appeared within hours of the alleyway encounter, suggesting it either followed that specific child home and waited for the perfect moment, or worse, it already knew where she lived and was waiting for her to return. Both explanations are deeply troubling. Both suggest a level of awareness and planning that goes beyond simple stalking into something more organized and purposeful. The figure that glided across the pumpkin patch without appearing to move its legs. That's not costuming. That's not stilts. That's not any normal human locomotion. That's something using a form that approximates human shape but doesn't quite operate under human physical constraints. And it moved fast when it wanted to. Fast enough that running targets could hear it gaining on them. But it still looked like gliding, like floating, maintaining that wrong quality even in motion. The robed figure kneeling for potentially 5 to 6 hours in cold October darkness. Human beings can't maintain that position for that long without moving, without shifting weight, without any visible discomfort. It's physically impossible. Muscles cramp, joints stiffen, and yet this figure apparently stayed in that ritual position for hours, waiting for the exact right moment to complete whatever purpose required that stable to burn. What kind of entity has that level of patience, that level of physical endurance, that level of dedication to a purpose we can't even begin to comprehend? These aren't human stalkers wearing costumes. These are something else using human-adjacent forms to operate in our world during the 1 month when the barriers are thin enough to permit it. And they're getting better at it. More sophisticated, more targeted. The encounters are becoming more frequent, more widespread, more reported, which means either there are more of them or they're becoming more bold. And neither option is comforting. I want you to think about your own October experiences. Have you ever seen someone standing perfectly still in an odd place, watching nothing in particular? Have you ever felt observed when walking alone at dusk, that prickling sensation that makes you turn around even though you see nothing there? Have you ever glimpsed a figure in peripheral vision that vanished when you looked directly at it? Have you ever had that moment of recognition, that instant where you think something is profoundly wrong about what you're seeing even though you can't articulate exactly why? If you have, you might have already encountered a watcher without recognizing it. You might already be marked. And the next time October rolls around, pay attention. Pay attention to the figures at the edges. Pay attention to the spaces between streetlights. Pay attention to the alleys and abandoned buildings and wooded areas. Pay attention to who's watching you. Because they're always watching. They're always positioned. They're always waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal themselves fully. And once they do, once you have that complete encounter, you'll never see October darkness the same way again. The children playing hide and seek learned to fear alleyways and darkness. The kid walking home from school learned to fear abandoned buildings. The woman with the dog learned that solitary night walks carry risks beyond the physical. The teenager at the pumpkin patch learned that isolation attracts attention from things we don't understand. And all of them carry those lessons with them permanently. All of them have been changed by brief encounters with entities that appeared, watched, revealed themselves, and withdrew. All of them are marked now. All of them are part of the pattern. And so are you now, because you've heard about them. You've learned the patterns. You know what to look for, and knowledge creates vulnerability in this case. The more you understand about the Watchers, the more likely you are to perceive them accurately when you encounter them. And perception seems to be what they want. They want to be seen. They want to be recognized. They want that moment of pure recognition where you understand that what you're looking at isn't quite right, isn't quite human, isn't quite safe. So this October, when the leaves start falling and the shadows grow longer and the darkness comes earlier each night, remember what you've heard here. Remember that figures standing still in unusual places might not be decorations. Remember that watching from abandoned buildings might not be tricks of light. Remember that figures positioned in liminal spaces might be there for a specific purpose. Remember that gliding movements and impossible positions and patient observation all point to something beyond normal human behavior. And if you see them, if you have your own encounter with the Watchers, remember this too: don't approach. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Trust that instinct that says something is profoundly wrong. Get to safety. Get to light. Get to other people. Because while the Watchers seem primarily interested in observing and marking, we don't know what happens if someone breaks protocol. We don't know what happens if someone confronts them directly instead of fleeing. We don't know what they're capable of when pushed beyond their standard operating procedure. The pattern is clear. The behavior is consistent. The purpose remains mysterious but undeniably purposeful. And every October, they return. Every October, they take their positions in the spaces between light and dark. Every October, they watch. And they wait. And they mark those sensitive enough to perceive them accurately. Building their catalog. Collecting their data. Preparing for something we don't yet understand but probably should fear. Stay safe out there in the October darkness. Pay attention to what's watching you. And if you see them, if you have that moment of pure recognition where you know you're in the presence of something fundamentally wrong, remember that others have survived these encounters. Others have fled successfully. Others have lived to tell these stories. You can too. You just have to recognize them for what they are before it's too late. Before that moment when passive watching transforms into active pursuit. Before you become another data point in their mysterious catalogue. Before you join the ranks of the marked, forever changed by brief contact with entities that operate in shadows and liminal spaces, that appear each October without fail, that watch with purposes we can only guess at and probably wouldn't want to fully understand. The watchers are real. The pattern is consistent. October is their month. And now you know. Now you're aware. Now you're sensitive to their presence. Which means next October, when the darkness comes early and the shadows fall wrong, you'll be looking for them. And the terrible truth is, they'll be looking back.